So our next topic is going to be a bit more interesting, and that's going to be the evening light. So basically we're looking for some nice pink, purple tones, very warm sunlight, and different colors in the sky. So the most basic way you can go about this is by just lowering the V-Ray sun. Okay, and that should automatically adjust the V-Ray sky as well and give us a more evening-like result. So for very basic scenarios where you have clear blue sky and sun low on the horizon, this sort of works okay. But if you want more colors, pinks, purples, stronger yellows for the sunlight, you're gonna need a different approach. The best part about this method is that it's extremely easy to set up, but it's not too flexible and the results are quite boring. You can try to adjust the result by going to your V-Ray sun and increasing the turbidity. This should make everything more yellow, including the sky. And you can also use a filter for the sun. Maybe let's make it more yellow, brighter, something like that. And that should give us a slightly more interesting result, but still it's not gonna be something to write home about. Okay, so maybe slightly more interesting, but nothing particularly great. Okay, so the next method we can use is the HDRI. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, I would not recommend using HDRIs for interiors with regular sized windows, like here or here. I would only use HDRIs for something like this myself. So where you have large windows, lots of area that lets in light. Otherwise, for all these other interiors, there's not going to be enough light coming in, especially if the HDRI is rotated so the sun is facing from the opposite side of the windows. And it's going to be very noisy and it's going to be slow. So I'm going to show you how to set up an HDRI for a scene like this. So let's get rid of that sun. Now let's clear out that sky. And basically what you do is you just create a V-Ray dome light. Somewhere in the viewport, set it to spherical, increase the resolution, but that's actually not needed. It's okay with 500. Can create a new V-Ray HDRI map in the material editor. Right, and let's browse for an HDRI image. And I'm going to use this example. And it should use a spherical mapping. So change the mapping type to spherical. And drag it into the texture slot of your V-Ray light. Just instance here. And let's render. I'm just going to check my exposure. So for a late evening like this, it would probably be about maybe 1/2 of a second with ISO 400 or so. And check the multiplier on my dome light and reset that to 1. And see how it looks now. So this way, if we introduce some artificial lighting, the results should match with what we would see in the real world. So the brightness would not be too great or too low for these artificial lights. So this looks somewhat somewhat okay regarding the exposure, but okay, let's just render and see how the final result looks. Okay, so this is how it looks, and as you can see, for this type of scene, it's a pretty decent way to light. So maybe let's increase the contrast a bit for the sky by reducing the inverse gamma 0.7 and bringing up the overall multiplier maybe 1.6, and that should boost the contrast for the sky as well as give us some slightly sharper shadows and stronger sunlight. Right, and that gave us slightly longer render times as well, and introduced a little bit more noise into the render, but that's okay. You can bump up the render settings or the light subdivisions to clean that up. Okay, so for this scene, HDRI works just fine. But what happens if you go to something like the scene over here? Now let's try and render and see how it looks. So first of all, I'm already seeing that it's too dark. So let's bring the exposure up to something similar like we did for that previous example. And maybe since the windows are even smaller here, we need to bring up the exposure even more. So something like that. Since the side that's facing these windows does not have the sun, we get the nice purple light, but everything is extremely dark and extremely noisy. We can bump up the exposure even more. But still, that's not gonna get rid of the noise, since there's simply not enough light coming from the HDRI into the interior. The result is not that great, and all we get is this extremely noisy, slightly purple light. And I think there are better ways to simulate this type of lighting than using in the HDRI. You can get a much cleaner result, much easier to control, and faster to render by using some alternate methods. So you can see there's plenty of noise and there's really not much you can do about it. Even if you bump up the HDRI subdivs to a crazy amount, it's not going to help too much. If your image is positioned in a way that the sun comes through the window, no, maybe something like -100 rotation. Okay, it's going to be a bit brighter, there's going to be a bit more light coming in, and the results are going to be a little bit better. But still, I don't think this is the best way to go for these interiors with regular sized windows. You can get this pink light in a different way that's going to be faster and more efficient. I would only use HDRIs to light interiors with large windows, and if the sun is coming in through those windows and not coming from the opposite side. So I'm going to show you some alternate methods you can use to create similar lighting. So let's get rid of that dome light, and let's go to our material editor and simply create a new gradient ramp map. Right. First of all, we want to change the coordinates to environment, spherical environment, and what's going to happen now is if we rotate this map 90 degrees, this center color is going to be our horizon. For example, if we set it to red, this left part is probably going to be the bottom. Let's set it to bright blue and set this top part to green, just to check if the colors are right. sorry. You want to drag and drop that map into the environment map slot, make an instance, and see what happens. And you can see that it goes from red to green, just like I expected. So basically, let's set the bottom to black. We don't need any light coming from there. Okay, like that. And set the top to dark purplish blue, maybe like this. Okay, so the horizon itself can be warm pink. Okay, maybe going to slightly cooler pink, purple, and finally goes to dark cool purple like this. Okay, I'm just gonna try these colors and see how it looks. And we get a nice similar light as we did before, but it's much easier to render cleanly. If you want to get rid of that noise, just bump up the subdivisions for the skylight portals. And it's very easy to adjust the colors, and this is great for scenarios where you have no direct sunlight coming in. So for example, we had that dark purple example where we got tons of noise and no decent light coming in. So it can probably be done with a map like this, or something similar. Okay, maybe a bit too saturated. And you can change the colors, experiment with the position of the sliders, and get all sorts of different results. If you want to adjust the brightness of this gradient, for example, you think this is too bright, it's not going to match with the artificial lighting, it's going to be too bright for that. So what you can do is you can go to your map and change it to an output map. Keep it as a submap, and you can adjust the output amount here. Let's say 0.5. And it makes the whole thing darker. Maybe that's a bit too much, maybe 0.3. Okay, like that. And for example, let's say you want to use an environment map to show the texture instead of this weird gradient, and you can just go and set up that HDRI image in the environment slot and use the gradient in GI override slot instead. So go to V-Ray, environment, turn on GI environment override, and drag and drop that output map here. Make an instance. And now we're gonna get those beautiful skies along with the light that we can easily control and adjust. Okay, and maybe let's check our exposure. I think it's a bit too much. Let's set 1/800. Reduce the ISO. So you get the sky in the environment, and you get the light from the gradient. Very easy to set up, very easy to control. So let's say too much noise. Just grab that skylight, bump up the subdivisions, and that should clean it right up. Can't really clean the HDRI noise in such a simple and quick fashion. Alright, so that's the basic setup if you do not have sunlight coming in from the window. But if you do have sunlight coming in from the window, it's going to be a bit more tricky. Okay, let's save that as evening basic. And in the next video, I'm going to show you an advanced method to combine these gradient maps with V-Ray Sky.